And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. On behalf of my co-chairs, Jackie Spear, Dave Joyce, and John Katko, we appreciate your support and your interest in the bipartisan Congressional Task Force to End Sexual Violence. Sadly, Representative Spear and Representative Katko had last-minute conflicts and are unavailable to join us. We expect Representative Joyce to join us as he's wrapping up another appointment. We do have Representative Mervan with us and a number of other members that will be joining us throughout the conversation. So with that, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming the author Stephanie Land to our roundtable today. Many are already familiar with Stephanie and her story through her best-selling book, Made, Hard Work, Low Pay, and One Mother's Will to Survive, which has now been adapted into a very popular miniseries on television. Stephanie, I just want to say, in reading your book, and I stayed up till 1 a.m, I was so enthralled. I and many, many others have been moved by your experience and your incredible love for your child and your perseverance overcoming challenges throughout your life. But not only that, I think your thoughtful and compelling words make clear that you have a long career ahead of you as a writer, and we will be the beneficiaries of your work. As I was reading your book, what really struck me was that all the challenges that lay ahead of you, even after leaving an abusive relationship, was a difficult enough step for any survivor to take, as we know from the testimony we've heard on this task force. You faced limited employment options, balancing finances and work demands with childcare, and difficult situations in public housing. And one of the things that really caught my attention that we need to be always attentive to correcting were the catch-22s, the stumbling blocks when you couldn't get the government assistance until you could demonstrate a job, but you couldn't get a job because you didn't have childcare because you didn't have the government assistance. Just a total circular conundrum. That didn't leave you with much time to process the domestic abuse that you experienced while you were working to stabilize your life. One of the many stories that really caught my attention was when you were fighting for custody, another big challenge that so many mothers and parents face. And I was appalled, frankly, by how you were judged in court for taking your child from what the judge considered a financially stable home, even though it was clear that you were in physical danger. No survivor should have to face that kind of backward logic. Through it all, you protected your child, you worked for financial stability, and you continued to pursue your education and ultimately your degree. So I think you're an amazing example and a beacon for survivors who read your book and who take that step to leave an abusive relationship. And in fact, as we were preparing for this roundtable, sadly, there was news made in my district of serious allegations made against a couple of cleaning companies where former employees bravely came forward to share experiences of harassment and assault from their superiors on the job. Thankfully, many were able to leave that environment. Some even established their own cleaning companies, but I fear that those outcomes may be the exception, not the rule. As Stephanie has highlighted, those in low-wage jobs don't have a lot of leverage in trying to stand up for themselves. You know, when you would lose a shift or the weather would be bad in the landscaping and you would just lose the pay, those who are really struggling and need that job are painfully vulnerable. And we know that perpetrators can detect that and that many take advantage of it. According to a study from the Center for American Progress, about 1 out of 4 sexual harassment complaints come from employees in the service sector. And my hunch is that that number would be much higher if employees felt they could come forward without retribution. So I look forward to our discussion today. I really appreciate, Stephanie, you coming forward and our colleagues joining us. We have now my colleague, Representative Pramila Jayapal, has also joined us from Washington State. Your story takes place in Washington State. Why don't I open it up to you, Stephanie, to say a few words, and then we'll give our colleagues a chance to speak. We'll let Frank go first, and then Pramila, and then whoever joins us in the order they come. And thank you so much again for being with us.
Wow, thank you for having me. I have been trying to talk to legislators for 6 years, so this is a pretty big moment for me. I don't know if any of you were sent a copy of my book when the paperback came out in early 2020. I had a campaign that tried to get my book to everybody, and I think we covered all the Senate at least. Yeah. So it's quite a moment to finally be able to look y'all face to face, even though it's over Zoom, and tell you a little bit about what I experienced. First of all, with domestic workers, I do know that they are the most vulnerable population in our country, and they are often immigrants and people of color. The majority of workers are, and that leaves them especially vulnerable just because of their work is their livelihood, and it's all they have. It just said my internet connection is, am I coming through okay? Okay.
Yep, you sound just great. Not
okay.
a problem on our end.
All right. I would recommend, if you haven't already, reaching out to Ajen Poo. She's the head of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and I'm sure she could speak to that a lot more than I can. I mean, I had some shady experiences where I was kind of fearful of that possibly happening, but I didn't experience it firsthand. I know that many have. And I guess I would like to say, as far as being in a domestic violence situation, mine was, I don't know, I was told in open court that a reasonable person would not feel threatened because it was only emotional abuse. At times, I was thinking about my petition for a no contact order this morning, and everything that I had to detail, and from another person's eyes who doesn't really understand emotional abuse, the complaints might have sounded petty. Like, oh, he threw a chair around in the yard, or he punched something next to my head or my baby infant daughter's head, but not, we didn't have any bruises or marks on ourselves. And it was all words. And
this is why we need more women judges. Honestly, it's as though misogyny in some ways runs so deep to assume that that's not threatening when we know about escalation, and we know that if left unchecked, a person that throws a punch right next to a baby is not a person that has boundaries that the rest of us can rely on to stay safe,
Right.
It's just
yeah. And so oftentimes when people have been in emotional abuse situations, when it does start turning physical, often they have been financially controlled. They have probably had a lot of non-consensual intimate encounters that I learned about later on. I didn't even realize that was happening. But there's so much control and isolation and degradation that by the time you know that it's obvious that you need to leave, you find that you can't. Yeah. And then when you go out and try to get help, you discover how many holes there are in the safety net programs. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about who has also been through a lot of the same that I have. She left a abusive partner and lived in her car. And we were talking about the TANF program, the temporary assistance for families, and how you basically have to hand over your child support check and in order to receive assistance. And a lot of the times the amount of assistance that I would have received would have been less than the child support that I was already receiving. And that was only $300 a month. In order to receive that assistance, you have to go and prove that you're either looking for work or working to some capacity for 40 hours a week. And, but the time that I went to apply, I think the second time, I didn't realize that you were required to ask the father for child support. You were required to open a child support case. And the woman in line in front of me was obviously very fearful of that person and said, I don't want to do that. It's just going to make him mad. And they said, well, you have to at least try. And there was, it just, at the time, it seemed like there were no protections for people who had experienced domestic violence, especially in these programs. And it's incredibly hard to prove that you have a residence, that you have utilities. Often the abuser's name is his name is on everything, and you're not allowed to have any property whatsoever, or really any livelihood. And so by that time, I hadn't worked in a year. I had no proof of having a rental, a residence. I had no proof of utilities. And when you go and apply for all of these assistance programs, that's the first thing that they ask you. And they ask you to prove that you have all of these things that you're already looking for and trying to access. So it's really backwards. And I know many people, friends of mine, who have been financially controlled after they have left through the court system. There are legal fees, there are meetings, there's paperwork, and it just goes on and on and on. I was lucky to find a pro bono lawyer once, but after that, you're pretty much on your own. And they have family law clinics, and they have, a few things that you can access. But as far as fighting your abuser in court, you're pretty much left to do it on your own.
Did you seek help from like domestic violence shelter? Like, were there ever people, you said maybe a legal clinic, but were there ever people that helped you navigate the whole complex process?
The Northwest Justice Project was a huge help. I'm sure you know about that, Representative Jayapal. And that was kind of like an initial one-time thing. For after that, there were legal advocates at domestic violence services that would go to court with you, would possibly look through. A few times there was an actual lawyer there that could give legal advice, and your advocate would come with you to court, but that lawyer was not officially representing you. And so it was very intimidating, to say the least, to have to appear in court. And usually the abuser has the financial funds to have a lawyer.
Yeah.
So, and their lawyer is not great, to say the least.
Yeah. And also blaming the victim is one of their whole strategies. So I'm delighted to have our colleague, Representative Gwen Moore, join us. Thank you, Gwen, for being with us. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Frank Mervan, and then we'll go to Pramila, and then we'll go to Gwen, and we'll see who else joins us. But again, Stephanie, thank you so much for your candor. I hope you do get a chance to appreciate how many people that you're helping to learn to navigate an impossible system, but also to advocate for changing that system. And, that's why we're here. So that's why we ran for Congress. That's why we're here, and we're here to help. Go ahead, Frank, take it away.
Definitely. I just want to say you had opened up by saying what an honor it was and a goal for you to be able to speak to the legislators and members of Congress. On the flip side of that, I'm honored to be able to be here with you because you gave a voice to a lot of voiceless people who are going through that every single day. And when you begin these conversations, it does have a ripple effect where people become more empowered and they learn the value of listening. And as I truly believe is making sure that we believe survivors first and foremost. So just a sliver of background. Prior to becoming a member of Congress, I served as a township trustee or a local elected official that administered emergency assistance. And there were trends with disruptions about people who had been abused as children and people who were in abusive relationships, and that unsustainability. And they would turn to our office, and we became a leader within that space in order to help people. And tearing down those walls of making it impossible to be able to get out of a situation financially was something that we focused on. So I want to let you know that I tip my hat to you. And obviously, while we're on here, I'm thinking of how we can do that on a federal level. It's very challenging, but we can use the power of our offices to envision what it's like to go through those systems without any safety nets. And so I just want to thank you for giving a voice to the voiceless, and realize that in my particular instance, you have an advocate that will join you as we look for solutions to make sure that those attempting to get out of those situations know that there are safe paths, and that we're prioritizing that as legislators so that nonprofits, government agencies, whatever the case may be, can provide the sustainable relief for a period of time so that individuals could get on their feet or become self-sustainable. So telling that story is very important. And I thank you for your courage and your bravery, because I know it's not easy. And I just want you to know that I'm a fan of yours. And so hopefully that it's trying to offset you saying how impressed you are to be here with us. I'm impressed that you're here with us. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, you guys are a little hard to track down. As you were talking, I was thinking about that, I don't know, as you saw very clearly in the series, how hard it is to find any kind of assistance as you're leaving a program. And a lot of the times, it's almost impossible to even get to the office and wait in line for as long as you need to. And I don't know what the application process is like currently, but I'm still assuming that you have daytime meetings, and it just seems like there's so many things that prevent you from getting ahead. There's the thing called the welfare cliff, but there's also being right at the edge of the cliff and knowing exactly how much you need to make, how much less you need to make in order to not lose hundreds of dollars in benefits. And what would have been so amazing to me at that time, I mean, not only the child tax credit and whatever services the Build Back Better will do with childcare and things like that, but if there could have been some kind of program where I just walked into an office and said, I'm a survivor, I'm a victim, I don't have proof, but here I am, and I received full benefits for 6 months or a year, and when you think about it, it's really not that much money. It usually comes down to $1 a person per meal per day, which is not enough to survive on, but it's at least a little bit of help. And I'm not sure where the Violence Against Women Act stands right now, but me personally, it saved me from being evicted after I was physically assaulted by my ex. We were living in low-income housing, and because a crime was committed in my residence, I was at risk of being evicted automatically. And I had to sign one piece of paper from the Violence Against Women Act, and that whole situation went away, and I was able to stay in low-income housing. And it really pains me to know that protection is not there for many people right now, especially through the pandemic. Violence against women has grown a lot and in domestic situations, and so I feel like there are like 100 things that I could bring up that could help. But as far as what's on your plate right now, the child tax credit is absolutely vital. I understand that's possibly ending next week. So I've heard from a lot of single parents who are basically surviving off of the child tax credit right now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
One thing I was just reading about, we're trying to capture the lessons learned and the silver linings from COVID that we learned from some of the changes that happened. And there are apps now that are very, very helpful for people seeking assistance, and many, many more people are able to navigate that on a computer or on an app. So I just thought that was an interesting development. Pramila, why don't you, thank you, Frank. Pramila, why don't you take it away? And we're joined by our colleague Judy Chu as well. So this is nice conversation.
Thank you so much, Annie, for doing this and for all your leadership on these issues. We are so grateful to you. And Stephanie, it is really great to see you. I want to put in my request right away to get you back to Washington State so we can do an event together, because I think we could do a phenomenally good, and we could probably get somebody from NJP. I'm sure they'd love to be a part of it as well, to have this discussion in our community. Obviously, I didn't represent you in Port Townsend, but I still think of you as a Washingtonian. So even though you're a Montanan now. So I am just really grateful to you, Stephanie, for your strength and for your storytelling to really illuminate the story of single mothers and the struggle to raise children in the face of societal failures. And I just wanted you to think back on your experience as a survivor of domestic violence, and wanted to ask you, what do you think was the most helpful thing for you in escaping an abusive relationship? And what was the biggest obstacle in your way? Just as a first question.
Well, I mean, to be very blunt, the thing that helped me escape was my car. I mean, if I didn't have a car, it would have been impossible. My vehicle became so vital in my life, and it was always the thing that kept me from getting to work. I mean, a $10 filter or something that went wrong could be a huge upset, and I would face homelessness again. The biggest obstacle was finding housing. I mean, I was living in my dad's driveway pretty much, which was not a stable or secure situation. We were living in a camper with a leaky roof. And my daughter was about 10 months old at the time. And I remember he lives in Arlington. And so I was looking for programs all over Snohomish County, pretty much anywhere. And there was really nothing. And I tried so hard to not return to Port Townsend, where it was a very small community. It was where my abuser lived. It was where he had I felt, turned the town against me in some way. I did not have a community there. I did not have space there. But that was the only place that I could find where they had open spots in their shelter system, which is a line of cabins that's built up for 2 families apiece. And I luckily got one to myself the entire 3 months that we were there. But even after that, I still had to work for 2 weeks before I could get any childcare. So me and another single mom traded off our kids morning and afternoon so that we could both work. And after a few weeks, I was able to prove that I was working. And I had, I think, from like noon to 4 childcare available. They didn't give me the whole day because I was only working part-time. And then, of course, once I started going to school again, the hours that I spent in school or doing homework or taking online classes didn't count toward childcare. And so eventually when the seasonal work ran out, so did my childcare. And it was always a huge thing that I was going through. And it often made me return to my abuser and ask him for help, which put the power and control back in his favor. And it was really degrading to have to go to him and ask for help when it came to childcare, because he often said, no, I'm not going to help you. And I had a job that I had to go to. It wasn't just, trying to get the day off. So I would say housing and childcare were the biggest. But I also only had $200 and I had absolutely nothing. And when you have nothing, it's hard to get even something, because you're forced to prove that you have some kind of income coming in, that you are working, that you are sustaining some type of minimum wage existence in order to receive services in the first place. So that was just one thing that I never really understood. And in the court system, I was seen as an unstable parent because of that, because I was struggling with housing, income, and he had stable housing and income. And his lawyer brought that up many times in court.
You've really segued beautifully into, because you talk a lot about childcare, in the book and in your interviews. And one of the things we've really been pushing on is this question of work requirements. And I think we think that, there's this myth out there that if you put in work requirements, it assumes that people who aren't supposed to get the aid aren't going to get the aid. But we don't realize how many barriers those work requirements put in the way of somebody like you accessing the very services you need. And so you've spoken to this a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, in Build Back Better, we do still unfortunately have work requirements. We're trying to change some of those things. But we're also pushing back against a narrative that says people are trying to take advantage of these programs, when in fact, they require enormous administrative cost. But most importantly, they put barriers in the way of particularly sexual assault, domestic violence, poor folks who can't meet those work requirements for all kinds of reasons. Do you want to say anything more about why it's important for childcare in particular to be available for everyone without imposing work requirements?
Well, I will come up with one scenario. When I was in college, the university childcare system did cover the hours that I was in class, and the hours that I was at work. I was self-employed, so I had to get all of my clients to write a statement saying that I was working in their house. There's always a huge file of paperwork that I carried around with me because I always knew that someone was going to need to look at it. But they wouldn't cover like the hour or two between class and work. And so I was responsible for those hours at, whatever their cost was. I think each semester I paid close to $500 or $600 just out of pocket for childcare, just because of that small gap. And I have never understood. I mean, I understand it. We don't like to give poor people money, and we don't like to trust them with things like childcare or even health insurance. Sometimes it really felt like I have never understood why the work requirements are there. When I was a senior in college, I was up for recertification for food stamps, and since my daughter was over 6 years old, I was denied food stamps as a full-time college student who was working 15 hours a week with a kindergartner. And it's because there was just absolutely no way that I could work 20 hours a week while going to school full-time. And it really feels like you're being punished for trying to be like everybody else, and trying to be like your peers or anyone with even a 4-year college degree. There are so many education programs that are not covered by work requirements at all. There are a lot of jobs that aren't covered by work requirements. I had to fight constantly to prove that I was working. And sometimes I was audited by the child care program twice. There was one time that I applied and they told me that I made $100 too much to qualify for benefits. And I was a freelance writer at the time. And so my income, wavered quite a bit. And so I could have easily lied and, or resubmitted. And, but I said, I don't understand it. How is that even possible? And she said, well, it looks like you're working from like 10 p.m. to 3 o'clock in the morning. So maybe you just don't even really need childcare. And I said, well, that's not an ideal situation. I was working with my infant daughter, my second daughter, sleeping in my lap at night. And I that stuck with me for so long, because I was constantly told, oh, it looks like you don't need it anyway, because you have this much money, you have this much going on, you make $50 too much. There was a time that I got a raise and suddenly I had a $50 copay show up for childcare. And there were so many times that I was told what I felt was that I just wasn't good enough. Unless I was physically working, I had no value. And there was no dignity wrapped up in just me being a human being who needed to house and feed their child. It was, oh, well, you have no value to us unless you are able to prove that you are working for these amount of hours a week. And it stuck with me for a really long time. I still feel that way sometimes, of just like any day that I have a day off, like, no, I'm not working, I need to be working. And it's probably one of the things that has stuck with me the most. As a poor person, you're constantly going through these PTSD type of situations, and you don't realize it because nobody tells you about it. You don't have mental health care. So as I have finally received mental health care over the years, I've realized just how many things from living in poverty, even that short amount of time, have stuck with me even 10 years later.
Well, I hope that you see that you are absolutely worth everything that, that we can possibly give to you. And I think it's just you've really articulated, and I hope I can work with my colleagues to just turn over this myth that work requirements help us. They don't. They really are huge barriers. And then I know there are other colleagues, but I'll just say the last thing I posted into the chat, a Ms. Magazine article from earlier this year called "The Case for a National Domestic Workers Bill of Rights." And Ai-jen Poo is a dear friend of mine. We worked on this bill together with the Bill of Rights. I introduced it last session of Congress with Kamala Harris was my lead in the Senate. This session, it's Kirsten Gillibrand and Ben Ray Lujan are the Senate leads. And I hope my colleagues will sign on to this bill, because we have not dealt with the fact that domestic workers were completely excluded from basic workplace protections and civil rights protections. And we have to fix that, because the incidence of sexual assault, sexual violence, sexual harassment for domestic workers is legendary, unfortunately. And without those basic protections, we simply are not going to be able to get support to workers that should have it, because so often these jobs are, they're not considered jobs. They don't have the same overtime protections. They certainly don't have the same civil rights protections, and they don't have the federal labor and civil rights protections that most people take for granted. So my last question to you is just, how did you come to realize that your work as a domestic employee was treated differently under the law? And what did it feel like to go to work knowing that you didn't have the same rights as other workers?
I had always worked really low wage jobs with no security. So I was kind of used to this world where if you call in sick, you risk being fired. I had never really had a sick day. I think I had one job at one point that had health insurance in my adult life, and it wasn't great. And so by the time I was working as a house cleaner, that job was a last resort to me just because of the job itself. Not that I don't respect that work, but it's not great work. And it was so precarious. And I felt like at any minute, if I complained or really spoke up for myself, I risked not having that client anymore. It was really tricky as I started branching out to more self-employed jobs where I had my own clients. I could charge more for them, but I also wasn't protected by the insurance that the company had. I would not receive any unemployment benefits if I was injured on the job. There was nothing like workman's comp when I'm working for myself. And even though I was able to charge more hourly, I was really vulnerable at that time. And I got some pretty weird calls of people asking me to clean in costume and for, lots of money an hour, but I'm a single mom and nobody knew where I was going during the day. I didn't really have someone to call and check in. And so even though you're able to schedule, you're able to have a more trusting relationship with your clients as a self-employed cleaner, your protections are much lower. And if you're an immigrant into this country, you might not even be able to get a job with protections. And so you are left as vulnerable as can be. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, more than half possibly, or at least half of domestic workers completely lost their jobs. And many of them weren't able to access unemployment benefits. A lot of them weren't even able to prove that they had been working. And I will say one more thing about work requirements. I really saw that as a way to keep the numbers down, to keep people from accessing services, because there was so much bureaucracy, so much paperwork. And there were times that things got lost in the mail and suddenly you didn't hand something in and you were kicked off. From someone else's perspective, that would be, oh, we have lower amounts of people applying for SNAP programs. But the fact is, it's just they're fed up with trying. And I think that, that happened to me. I was just finally done and spent many months hungry after that. And but I was so tired of just having to prove that I had worked. For a very, very small amount of food.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Really, we're incredibly grateful. Shouldn't have been this hard for you to get in touch with members of Congress. Grateful to Representative Kuster for her leadership in bringing you here, but looking forward to working with you on all of these issues and very, very grateful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I am in Washington a couple of times this spring. So
okay, we're following up on that because I think it would be a fantastic discussion and we will get a massive crowd, I know.
Thank you, Pramila. And let's hear from our colleague, Gwen Moore, who's been so supportive of our task force. And thank you, Gwen, for being with us and for this conversation.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Annie, for your stewardship over this space. I want to thank my other colleagues as I look around the screen for your leaning into these issues we're talking about here today. Really so happy to meet you, Representative Moran. I know that if you're in this space, it's because you are in this space with us. Stephanie, you are the reason that I came to Congress. You're my soul. If I had to show up with a person, I know you come from the state of Washington, no disrespect from Pramila, no disrespect, but she's the person that I'm representing in Congress. She's the reason that I gave up years and years and years of seniority, 14 years of seniority, to leave the Financial Services Committee, where I had a tremendous amount of seniority and experience, to go to Ways and Means, to represent those women who were subjected to the welfare system, and then, victims, survivors of sexual assault as well. I hail from the state of Wisconsin, where, of course, as you remember, we ended welfare as we know it there first. So I'm extremely familiar with everything that you've described that has been a hurdle. And the one thing that you have continued to say is that you don't understand why we have work requirements. You don't understand why we have a system that's so inefficient with regard to providing the benefits. It's done on purpose, Stephanie. I mean, it's a policy decision. You know, in my state of Wisconsin, when Tommy G. Thompson was there, literally the Restaurant Association came to him and said, look, we cannot make these people go to work. These people are not stupid. You know, we can't compete against Medicaid. We're not going to give a single one of these women any health care on our jobs, wiping down the tables, or, domestic work as you do. Not a single one of them is going to get a full-time job so that we can incur the expenses of workman's compensation and all the other sort of benefits, family leave, days off. We aren't going to have, we aren't going to, we don't have any real jobs for these women. And then you're giving them food stamps on top of that, and you're making it convenient for them because they can have a unified application and qualify for all these things at one time. And in addition to that, you're helping people like Gwen Moore escape the welfare system by enabling them to go to school while they're on welfare. I mean, I had the hardest time on welfare, and were it not for, there are no such things as social workers, I hear. But I mean, people who were sneaking to help me, calling up saying, Gwen, if you come down at exactly 10 o'clock, I'll see you and won't make you wait all day. Gwen, did you know that there was this thing? And I mean, really, a system that forced my daughter into foster care. My sister went and got a foster care license, so that I wouldn't have to drop out of college because they didn't want me to go to school while I received benefits from her. And then they came and quote unquote busted me in my pajamas at my sister's house to cut my daughter off of the care she had. So I get what you're doing, but one of the people that has been a mentor to me is Frances Fox Pivot. And she wrote a book, she's a very elderly woman. So if you don't know her name, I can understand that. She was very instrumental in starting the welfare rights movement. And she wrote a book, which is very instructive, called Regulating the Poor. I mean, and women, since TANF, we've had 2 generations of women over 20 years. We've had 2 generations of women who are forced into the low wage workforce, facing all these benefit cliffs. So as soon as they make, $10 an hour, then, they're no longer eligible for other ancillary benefits. The system is, let me borrow something that I know Jayapal will love, rigged, so that you will never, ever be able to escape the low wage workforce, which according to Frances Fox Piven, the industry that sort of came out of slavery. I mean, when the National Labor Relations Board came in and set wage and labor standards, they excluded all of these jobs that basically women did. And so there's very little regulation in these jobs. Some of the welfare work jobs, as you know, don't really offer any sort of upward mobility to women. In terms of threatening to cut you off or cutting you off, these agencies which provide the benefits are allowed to retain the residuals of the benefits that they don't provide you. So there's an incentive with not providing you with daycare. That can go toward, the private for-profit agencies, many of which many are, to increase their bottom line. It can go back to the state government or the city government. They can fill their potholes with money that have been set aside for temporary assistance to needy families. So there's a huge incentive. So when you come in, to convince you that you don't need childcare, In Wisconsin, we had folks that were called diversion specialists. Their job, when you walked in there with your belly big, with one child hanging on, was to convince you that you didn't need any help at all, and give you maybe a voucher to go to a store to get some food for that night, and to just convince you that you're going to have your dignity if you just take the first job that comes along. And so I really, I'm glad that Judy Chu is on here from the Committee on Ways and Means, because I think that one of the things that's in peril now is the child tax credit, which I think is a real important basis for ending welfare as we know it, this guaranteed child income. And so you want to know why people want you to work for benefits, why they are so opposed to the refundable child tax credit, like every other civilized nation on earth provides this type of benefit to families and children. It is because they want to maintain this workforce and to force, and I'm going to say it, women into the workforce. You hear all of the grief now about we paid people to not come back to work, and look at what has happened. We keep paying. The inflation now is not being blamed on the 0% interest rates that we're given to all these rich people. No, it's been blamed on the child tax credit that we've provided for 6 lousy months. A rounding friggin' error in our outlays. So you want to know the reason why? It's on purpose. It's to maintain a low wage workforce where there is no escape, and there will be a plethora of workers that look just like you available for this workforce. And I'm going to yield back to Annie, and because I'd much rather hear you.
Just waiting for the question, Gwen.
Yeah, huh?
I was just waiting for the question.
Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to. So
No, I'm teasing you. It's fine.
Why she's the one that asked the question. I don't understand why this is happening. It's
Yeah.
on purpose.
Yeah.
It's on purpose. That was the question. Why has it happened? We're doing it on purpose to maintain a low wage workforce, which primarily women comprise.
Yeah. Well, this is why we're glad to have people like Gwen Moore fighting for us here and we can thank Gwen and Judy for the child tax credit and, for making a difference in people's lives that were really hurting during COVID for sure. And we're going to do everything we can to continue those benefits because they make sense. Here's the bottom line in my state anyway, we are so desperate for workers that we've got to invest in childcare, in, paying wages that are sufficient that workers can have a car, as you say, that's the key link, and have a home and, have housing and have childcare and have healthcare and have mental health care. And that's all needed to keep our economy going, because right now there's not enough people to do the jobs that we have. So it is, Gwen, thank you for speaking truth. You always do. All right, Judy Chu, we're going to give you the last word, Judy, and then we'll let Stephanie wrap up.
So, Stephanie, thank you for joining us today. I have seen the entire Netflix series that's based on your book. I was incredibly moved by it and the struggles that you outline, having a small child fleeing domestic violence, starting from scratch, and how every decision you made was influenced by how much money it would cost. You agonized over every dollar you spent, and they even had a cash register on the screen. That was very effective, by the way. But here you were trying to better your life, and yet everything cost something, whether it was the gas in the car, the cost for the ferry, or the great indignity of even having to pay for your own supplies and uniform for the value maids job. And even when you finally were able to get through all the bureaucracy and get a rent subsidy, you had to beg landlord after landlord to just accept you as a tenant. And I have to say, when I was watching, I thought about our child tax credit, which we expanded with the American Rescue Plan and which we are hoping to continue with the Build Back Better Act. Our expansion in the American Rescue Plan increased the payments to $300 per child per month. And it allowed for you to get it even if your income was extremely low, so that you don't pay taxes, which I think was a situation you were in. And it comes every month now, and you can decide what you spend it on, whether it's groceries, rent, school supplies, or more. So can you say something about what a difference the child tax credit as it stands now would have made in your life?
Oh, having any kind of money that I could budget for would have been huge. That was dependable, came at the same time every month, that I knew would go immediately toward rent or any type of payment that I needed to do. Just knowing that I had $300 coming in on a regular basis that came all at once. My child support is set up so that it comes to me weekly out of his paycheck. And so I get exactly $138.76 a month or a week. And it's been that way. It's been that set up that way for a long time. And it was not like I would be able to save that money throughout the month. And so I was just barely making ends meet, and often had $10 left for even shampoo or a sponge, or there was a lot of years when I would pay the minimum payment on my credit card and then be able to use that for toiletries, and would max out my credit card again that month. And I knew exactly how much money I had. But even when we were making it, when we were paying all the bills, I was still left with maybe $20 for an entire month. And that covered clothing for my kid, for me, covered work supplies, it covered laundry, gas, toiletries, everything. And there were so many months that I had to go without because I couldn't afford it. There were, many nights of eating ramen so that my kid could eat better food. And I can't even imagine what it would have been like. When I started as a freelancer, I found a job with Community Change in DC. And I became a writing fellow for them. And I received a stipend that was $800 a month, which was just mind-blowing, unbelievable to me. But that amount in low-income housing could cover my rent and most of my bills. And so I could suddenly focus on other things because I wasn't battling this, the biggest kind of insecurity that you can really have, I think, is not knowing if your kid's room is going to be there for them next month, or, if they're still going to have a bed, or if we're going to have to move again, where are we going to go? And that could just be for not paying the electric bill. And as a mother, taking their child to daycare when they were sick, taking their child to a pediatrician when they were incredibly sick over and over again, I became very fearful that someone was going to knock on my door and take my child away from me because I was not providing for them. And it was not because I wasn't trying. It was just I couldn't make ends meet because I wasn't being paid enough. Even though I was getting $9 an hour, by the time I subtracted all the money that I was spending just to get to work, to be dressed at work, and to have supplies at work, it came to about $5 or $6 an hour. And in those types of jobs, I wasn't allowed to work more than 6 hours a day. I had to take up extra hours in other places. And there was never, I could never find just one job that would support me and that was during daycare hours, and was a healthy environment for me. And I was so limited with childcare options because a lot of the daycares wouldn't even take the voucher because it didn't pay the full amount. And so a lot of the, I guess, safer daycare situations like we saw in the series were inaccessible for one reason or another. And it was threatened for me. I handed in a handwritten pay stub at one point and used that for the recertification for childcare. And my caseworker called me and yelled at me, saying that I was trying to sneak one past them and it wasn't real. And I needed to bring in proof that I was really working. And so I had to take off work, waited in the DSHS office for 2 whole entire days, just to make sure that I still had childcare. And I will never understand that. I will never understand why I had to take off work to prove that I was working, and therefore lost those wages, possibly wouldn't be able to pay rent that month. But it's all just to prove that I am working this job that only pays $5 or $6 an hour. I don't understand why that's so important. And I do think it is a lot of forcing people into jobs that nobody else wants to do. There was always this saying, like with the GOP especially, it's like, well, if you don't like your job, if it's not paying enough, then just get a better job. And when the unemployment benefits were increased and people had some time to either go back to school or to look at their options, and they did go out and get better jobs. And now we're complaining that nobody wants to work because nobody's working at Burger King anymore. And it's because they did go out and get better jobs or improve their life in some way. And I hope that that is seen the way that it is, and not, I've been telling people it's not that nobody wants to work, it's that they don't want to work for you personally, because you're probably not paying them enough. So I would love for this narrative that was started with Reagan in the 80s about poor people being lazy and taking advantage would disappear, but it comes up again and again and again. I feel like that for me as an advocate for the last 5 or 6 years, that's what I talk about all the time.
Stephanie, how has your life changed since the Netflix series came out?
Well, I mean, since it came out, very specifically, I have like 125 new followers on social media, and it's a little intimidating. I'm a very introverted and shy person in real life. So I have been working with a team to figure out how to use that platform in the best way. And it's really amazing to me to see conversations on social media, especially by people of color, who are given space to be angry. That just doesn't happen normally. I talk a lot about how people are paying attention to my story because I'm a white person who is now successful. I was able to get an education. I am the story that we like to hear, the rags to riches success story. And so I have tried to bring that up as much as possible, and saying that we need to listen to people in our communities, and especially people of color, because even my experience, as horrible as it was still one of privilege. And so I have been really encouraged by seeing on social media that people are sharing their stories, especially with domestic violence, because that has been such a taboo subject for so long.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Judy and Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that. And I find myself at home with employers, who are complaining about exactly what you're talking about. And I feel like, take your crappy job. I mean, what I say to them is there's not a county in this country where a person can afford rent for a home for themselves, even without children, but especially if they do have children, on the wages that you're offering. It doesn't exist. And, you know, one of the big changes from COVID is, first of all, the resources that Congress has put into child tax credit, and increased food payments, et cetera. But going forward, it's also that the economy is changed and people are not willing to take those jobs at such meager wages that they can't live. And so now, you know, fast food outlets in my district are advertising $14 an hour, $15 an hour, and factory wages are having to keep up, and domestic wages as well. So, well, thank you to all of you for being with us. Stephanie, your courage, and thank you as well for sharing that about, you know, we're all trying to be much, much more mindful of our privilege and having more voices at the table. And I'm so proud of Gwen and Judy and Frank for bringing these voices forward every single day in Congress. We're going to take a lot of suggestions from you, and we will look forward to our continued work together, and clearly want to stay in touch. But thank you for your courage. Thank you for your advocacy. You're doing a great job.
Thank you
Be
all for
well,
listening
everyone.
today.
Stay safe. Take good care. Bye-bye.